Herzlich willkommen, liebe Investoren, Spekulanten und Trader. Kamala Harris oder Trump oder ein dritter Kandidat, den wir noch nicht gesehen haben. Was ist der Makro-Trade? Ist es für die Nummer 47, der nächste Präsident? Ist es Trump? Oder ist es Kamala Harris? Dann wäre Trump nämlich, wenn er gewinnen sollte, Nummer 48. Oder wenn Kamala Harris oder wer auch immer gewinnt, könnte es entweder bei der Nummer 47 bleiben oder bei der Nummer 48. Viel Spaß beim Schauen. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another issue of the Grey Market Talk. And today we are a bit outside the normal schedule. Because is it President number 47 or is it President number 48? What do you think?
Well, I think it could well be 48.
It's interesting. That's why we came up with that idea to say, yeah, fine. We usually don't talk about politics, which we also are actually not doing today. Yeah? We're just talking about the implications of different politicians. So it's not a judgment or any value statement, whether we prefer Ms. Harris over Mr. Trump or not. It's just if the stated policies come true. What is the macro trade? What's the name of the macro trade? Is it macro 47 or macro 48? What I'm talking about, just an explanation. Trump is always handed as if he wins the election, he is number 47. If Kamala Harris would become president now, if Biden steps back, and it's Tuesday at 5 o'clock German time, so everything could happen within the next half hour, then she would actually be 47. And if Trump then would win the election, he would be number 48 in the new scaling. I think there are a lot of labels already printed, which need to be reconsidered if that happens. Nick, what's your take? Is Biden staying in power till January?
That's a really difficult question, I must say, because no one really knows, but there's an awful lot of speculation out there. I mean, really, no one knows. There's an incredible amount of speculation and conspiracy and all of this stuff. And it must have been pretty serious, I must say, for Biden to basically pull out 6 months ahead of the time. And yeah, I mean, you just don't know whether he could actually then say, actually, I'm not well enough to carry on.
Well, I think it's if you look at the whole scenario, there are only two ways to look at it. Either he wasn't mentally capable anymore, or physically capable, or both, to run for the presidency, right? Why on earth would he still be commander-in-chief for another 6 months? Or he is able to be commander-in-chief, then they really played a tough one on him, because the Democrats, whoever's running the back room, simply decided, no, we can't win with him, so let's get rid of him and shoehorn somebody else in. I think at the moment they don't know what's happening, right? They just know Biden can't win against Trump, so we have to come up with something, and that's why we have no news at the moment. Is Biden still president? Has he resigned? Will he resign a little bit later? Will he wait till the stock exchange closes next weekend? Which is my guess. I think he's going to resign after closing on Friday evening or Saturday.
Wow. Okay. Well, and then, you know, the next question is, does Harris get the nomination, or is there somebody else?
That is a very good question. I think if she's not getting the nomination, they can't use all the funds they have collected.
Indeed.
Because they are tied to a candidate, and then they will have to come with somebody else up. The killer move would be obviously to get RFK in again. He left the Democratic Party because he didn't like their selection process. If they have their mind screwed on, then you shoehorn him in again, even as vice president or vice presidential candidate if he wants to. And Trump hasn't got a chance in hell to win against that.
I think I don't know if, again, I'm sure it's true, but maybe it wasn't, that Trump did contact Robert Kennedy and offer him yeah, he did. And apparently, and offer him a role in his administration. So,
well, as Attorney General, he would have been good, right? Because he hates all the institutions anyway, who shortchanged him. So it would have made sense. Well, we have to wait for that. But at the moment, what's the rumor situation now? Everybody said Biden signed this letter that he is, how they always call it, pausing his campaign or something like that. And that was handed out on personal stationery, not on White House stationery. And nobody has seen him since then. So when you watch this video, Maybe we already have a speech from Mr. Biden out there, what was happening. But my guess is he's not going to stay president for the next 6 months. No way in hell. If they want to win this election, they want to also give Miss Harris a leg up. And then she would be the first female black president, number 47 of the United States, and could run from that platform.
There is a sort of a question mark as well, whether sort of technically she is defined as the black president or not, because she has Indian origin.
Well, you know how the Democrats are. It doesn't really matter, yeah?
But I mean, here's the other question. If, let's just say, Biden is not well enough to carry on, does she get the sympathy vote that has just sort of been with Trump? Does the sympathy now come back to the Democrats because they say, the man has been, he lasted right up to the finish line and couldn't do it. Is there some kind of sympathy push for the Democrats? When I just looked at the polls are really quite close.
Yeah, well, she's polling. She did poll worse than Biden in the past, yeah. But I think you absolutely have a point. I was browsing through the polls as well, and I was looking into what CNN had to say, and that was actually quite interesting. Trump had a bump after the assassination attempt, but Trump's popularity actually didn't go up. Biden's went down. So it seemed as if Trump has collected all the voters he had already anyway. And people simply saw the horrific interview or the conversation they had and let Biden drop. And the Democratic Party has realized that. Now, Ms. Harris is 59. So for American terms, she's young. Yeah, it's not the old Politburo they have running there. And I'm promising you this. The Democrats who said age is not a problem, the moment she will be president, they'll turn it around and say Trump's too old.
Well, possibly.
Yeah, so, well, think about it. He is a power to reckon. But I remember the time, yes, and you as well, we are that old. Ronald Reagan was also a machine, yeah, the great communicator in his first 4 years. And then he deteriorated. Yeah, he was suffering from mental decline, and they somehow went through the finishing line. Who tells us that that couldn't happen with Trump? I think there's a valid point there. He might be fit right now, but the question is, I think it's not a shoe in for Trump yet. Yeah.
Indeed, I must say, I was quite surprised about how close the polls were, and sympathy here and there, and it can get even closer. You just don't know.
So really the interesting thing for us is obviously now, whoever gets it, where is the macro trade, or is there a macro trade at all? So we thought Nic and I will run briefly through a couple of policies to get an idea what it actually means if Ms. Harris becomes the next president, or becomes the president and stays the president, or becomes the president and then Mr. Trump becomes the president, or somebody else shoes in and Biden stays the president. Anyway, we will have two policies, Democrats versus Republicans. Republicans well covered through Mr. Trump. And I think the Democratic policies, there's also no secret in there. So I thought we'll give it a go and start with our favorite topic, Nic, tax policies. Kamala Harris, what does she stand for? Progressive taxation. Welcome to Europe. We already have it. She wants to increase taxes on the wealthy and on corporations. And Mr. Trump, on the opposite side of the medal, wants to cut taxes, further reduce capital gains taxes, and let corporates roam more freely in the environment, which basically we just turn around and look back what happens in the past. Mrs. Harris will obviously reverse some of the already existing Trump tax cuts. What do you think about that, Nic? What
really do you think she'll reverse some of his cuts? I must say, on the tax side, I was, let's just say sort of Biden was still in the race today. At, some months ago, we were talking about, well, Trump and Biden, and both would renew, because these tax cuts which Trump introduced in his time expire next year. And whoever was going to win, the understanding was that these tax cuts would be renewed, and the tax cuts were worth about 1.5% of GDP. So if she goes against that and rolls back some of his tax cuts, well, then obviously she's going to be taking it from somebody else, and that can only be the large corporates, tech, and the like. So you tell me.
Well, they will go after the rich, yeah, or whatever is being
Absolutely.
perceived as rich. However, I remember these discussions when even the Democrats defined at the beginning, before Mr. Biden became president, you were only counted as rich if you made 400K a year. Then suddenly they rephrased that into if a family makes more than 400K a year. So cut it in half already. Yeah? You're at 200K. And we all know, yes, if you tax the rich, you can tax them once and then you'll never get anything further out of them. And even if you would confiscate all the money the really rich boys have, well, it might be able to run your country for half a year. And that's that. Huh?
The difference with America when you tax the rich is that, the French tried this obviously under Hollande, and every sort of millionaire just said, well, I'm leaving. And then, if you're living in France, you've got some other sort of choices around Europe to go to if you're super rich. But if you're American, these Americans are not going to come to Europe and say, well, I'm going to up sticks here and go and move to another country. It just won't happen. So,
yeah, well,
you're
taxed on your worldwide. You're taxed on your worldwide income anyway as an American, right?
Absolutely. So you can't run away from it. Yeah.
So are they just going to take it? If they don't have a choice, they will have to, right? But the super rich, okay, let's assume Mr. Bezos buys one super yacht less than he already has. Where does it hurt? At the big base in the middle, which is already being beaten up by inflation. We looked in one of our previous shows at the true inflation numbers. Prices have gone up 25 to 30% at the grocers, at normal stuff people need since before 2020, January 2020, before the health crisis started. And I don't really think, if I'm going back into the old books about Austrian economics, have you ever heard of a country that is doing exceptionally well the moment they start increasing taxes?
Look, I mean, as soon as they get over about somewhere around, I think the number is around 18 or 19% of GDP. If the tax base goes up above that level, then the economy does badly. At least the stock market does badly, and as the stock market is 2/3 of the economy, effectively, this is, they'll be shooting themselves in the foot. So they're at the edge of what they can take. So the only thing they can do is redistribute. So they take from one and they give to the other, and that's, at the end of the day, it's down to incentives. But I think the total take can't really increase beyond where they are today. So I think that's the first thing. And the second point is, it doesn't matter what they take. We know that the spending plans of the government far exceed what the tax take is by, something of the order of 6%. And for that reason, it's not going to help them either way. So, the macro stays the same. For people like you and me, when we look at the numbers and we say, well, how many treasuries are going to be issued this year? How much do these guys need to borrow? We know that whether it's Trump or whether it's Harris or whoever, they're going to need to continue to borrow. And the CBO numbers, the Congressional Budget Office estimates of the deficit over the next 10 years, I'm not sure that if we looked at a table today and we looked at the table, under either new president, because we know we're going to get a new president because Biden is not there, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to tell the difference, because on the surface, there might be a difference in the breakdown, but on the surface, these numbers are going to look as bad as they look today. And that just means, the consequences. Well, how do they manage as a country? And they'll continue to borrow, and they will rely on they'll try to get international investors into to buy treasuries, but as we know, international investors, Japanese are not, because they're looking after their own thing. Chinese definitely not. The Russians definitely not. They stopped 10 years ago. And then in the Middle East, so they're not going to be supported internationally. The largest buyers today are in Europe and UK of treasuries, but the growth rate of treasury purchases are around 2.5% a year. And when your deficit is increasing something of the order of 6% a year, you still need to bridge the gap. So it comes back down to those, who is going to bridge the gap? And is that going to be the Fed, or is that going to be some forcing domestic savings institutions to buy the debt? And then the question is, if they're buying the debt, have they got room to go and buy equity? And that's really the big question.
Well, they have their expensive pet projects. Yeah, for the Democrats, it will be the healthcare reform, strengthening, expanding the Affordable Care Act, one of the biggies Obama introduced, Medicare for all, right? Minimum wage increases, workers' rights strengthening, and obviously the big green elephant in the room, climate change and the green economy. For Trump, the criticism always goes, he wants to reduce taxes. That's also a cost. As a capitalist, reducing somebody's taxes on what they've earned for me was never costs. It's just simply you leave more money into people's own pockets. The other side is obviously, yes, if you want to invest in the health sector, you have to take money you've issued through treasuries and then give it to some probably big, large corporations, because you can either much easier ask them to do as you want them to do stuff. So if we see that from an inflation perspective right here, on the face of it, you could say, yeah, both of them want to spend money, right? Does it really make a difference whether you spend it in healthcare and in education and in minimum wages and housing for the poor, or if you simply say, yeah, the Treasury doesn't take any more taxes in, so we have a gap there as well. What, in your mind, would be the inflation multiplier in these games?
Well, I don't think it's going to change to where we are today. I mean, the government is throwing an awful lot of money into the system, right? So, we already have that government sort of participation in the economy, whether they're investing in defense or whether they're investing in healthcare. The money's going into the system. So, the inflation story only comes, and coming back to Milton Friedman, it's always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And so who is there going to be printing of money? And when you're increasing your deficits, if it's not being funded overseas, and you've got to be, and you're participating, you're going to get the banks to finance you or the central bank to finance you, then ultimately you're going to be printing money. Then there's the other side of the inflation game, the inflation game, which is the price inflation, not monetary inflation, where goods prices go up because you say, we don't want to buy from, the cheap sources anymore, China or wherever, because we want to sort of produce the stuff at home. We know it's going to be more expensive to produce stuff at home, so prices are going to be going up then.
So the tariffs proposed by Mr. Trump would work again for inflation.
Well, I mean, that's going to increase prices. That's not sort of inflation, because, if you're a central bank, you say, well, I'm going to fight inflation. And you say, well, how are you going to fight an inflation when the inflation is caused by a tariff, right? So, and actually sort of one of the ways that I think Trump wants to finance some of these tax cuts is to use the tariffs to offset against the income tax cut. So he effectively saying, well, we shouldn't be paying so much tax in America. Let's just let the exporters overseas pay the tax through these tariffs. And, this is another way to kind of offset the burden on the economy.
Well, they could be back to the roots. That in America, before they had an inland revenue and income taxes, they financed the state exclusively through tariffs.
There you go. I mean, I think, Trump is looking for other ways. And, Team Trump, Team Harris, at the moment, it looks like when you're looking at both of them, I think people like you and me who are in Europe and got no clue really about American politics and everything that's going on. But I think we've got a better feel for what Trump wants to do than what Harris wants to do, because she's sort of come from being in the shadows to suddenly being out there, and everyone's saying, well, great. Well, what's her tariff? What's her policy on going forward? And the truth is, you go to sort of, you say inclusive, use words like fair, use words like diverse, and then you kind of run out of things, and you say, well, I don't know about the rest, because she's not been very vocal about sort of the things that she wants to do, and I think that's fundamentally the problem right now for analysts. When you say, well, what's the Harris White House going to do, or the Harris team going to do? I'd say people don't really know, and that's fundamentally a big problem. So you kind of assume, well, it's going to be the same as what Biden was doing in the past, and okay, so let's forget it's Harris, and it's actually an extension of Biden's policy. And then you're back to Trump versus the Bidenomics, and we understand that. So they're both spending money, and that's the game.
Well, it's not predictable. I'm pulling the age card again here, because your point about unpredictability. You remember the time when Clinton was voted in and everybody said, oh, the commie boy is going to kill the American economy. And then what he did was actually he completely got the crazies off his own plate. And I remember that as well as you do, when we thought for a while, oh, we are going to run out of treasuries, because the deficit was zero at one point in time. And they had the best economic phase ever. Well, let's put it that way. I don't think that Mrs. Harris has the political skill set Mr. Clinton used to have.
Well, I mean, that's another issue, because actually Biden has the incredible skill to put policies out there and go to Congress and go to the House and go and discuss these policies and try and work with the politicians. He's been around so much, so he's managed to do an awful lot in his time. And the question is, Harris sort of, I don't think she has the same credibility. But remember, when Clinton managed to create sort of the only surplus, I think, for the last, I don't know how many years. He was coming off the back of a huge, stock market rally as well. It's a bit strange at the moment that we have theoretically a huge stock market rally. We're not in a recession. The economy is booming like crazy, and yet the deficits are getting bigger. And as I say, whoever goes in has got like the big question to answer, and that is, what are you going to do about the deficit? And the reality is, the answer to that is they're not going to do anything, neither of them, because they can't do anything, because the hard choice is nobody wants. Even the bond vigilantes don't want it either, because you might make money on your treasuries, but you're going to lose money on everything else that you've got. So that's also a bad thing. So then what happens is, we come back to the policy on the dollar. And I think both of them, at the end of the day, probably will want to continue this sort of general trend of a weakening dollar and against the rest of the world. Firstly, we discussed this before, these nuanced policies, where, dollar weakens against yen, dollar weakens against the Chinese currency, but what else does it weaken against? It weakens against everything else, so commodities and and the like, and that's therefore that's the gold trade, therefore that's the Bitcoin trade, is because at the end of the day, all of these economies around the world, these highly indebted economies, are all facing the same problem. There's not enough growth, and they're all scrambling. There's this piece of cake out there, called global growth, and they're all grabbing as much of it as they possibly can. And, there's no sort of chief at the top to say, maybe we can make the cake bigger if we all work together. No. So they all decide there's a cake out there, and America want to grab a big piece of it, and Europe want to grab whatever they possibly can grab, and the Chinese want to grab as much of it, and they also have a problem on growth, especially right now. So, I mean, this really is a major problem. So, however aggressive, let's just say, the Trump policy will be, when he goes and bangs the table to the Chinese and says, sorry, you need a stronger currency and we need to weaken ours. These guys, they're not doing great. So they haven't got much to give.
Now, I think they don't have to pursue the strategy of weakening the dollar. It will happen on its own, because you made the point. Nobody's ever going to reduce the deficit, never mind the debt. So what we will see, or what is an explanation, we were talking about that for the whole last year. What is the explanation for overvalued equity markets going through the roof? Well, one of the simplest explanation is if the market already sniffs out that this debt will never be paid back, that the currency will eventually evaporate over time. So what do you want to hold? Real assets. And then we're actually coming already in the investment case I wanted to talk about with you. We already, or I've mentioned their plan for healthcare they have in there. So I think healthcare is a very interesting sector, but they come from different approaches. Yeah, Mrs. Harris or the Democrats want to have global healthcare, yeah, or universal healthcare. That worked fantastically in the UK, didn't it, Nic?
Well, you see, for a while, and as we're talking about UK, I mean, you brought it up, so I've got to answer in some way. I grew up. I'm alive because the NHS looked after me, but the argument, of course, especially now in the UK, is that there's been such an influx of immigration. This is not sort of a political view, but it's been a huge influx of immigration. I think 600,000 new immigrants in 1 year, going up to, I think, June of 2023 was the number I saw. And 600,000 people need housing, they need medical care, and all of this stuff. And you've got that same problem in America, because they've also got this kind of immigration thing. So they also have to house them. They also have to provide medical assistance to them. And this is where this whole kind of problem comes at the end of the day. It's clear that the Harris view is far more lenient on immigration and Trump, and that might also sway the voters. But the more lenient you are, the more you need to spend at the end of the day, and that's got to come from somewhere.
So in fantastic communist fashion, what you would want to buy then, if the ticket is a democratic ticket, you want to buy the big healthcare conglomerates, right? Because they are the ones who will be flushed with money. Because you just mentioned this phrase, you have to look after the immigrants. And I think the number in the UK, in the US was 30 million. And so far, the plan, I think, from the Trump
number, if that's true, that's I'm asking.
Yeah.
You sure? It's
not in 1 year, over the last 5 years, 30 million. Yeah. The plan from the Trump administration at the moment will be like, no, I don't have to pay for them. They can pay for themselves, like everybody else did in America for all times. Yeah. And he wanted to solve this cost problem they have with their health infrastructure, to allow actually different insurance providers to compete over state lines. I didn't know that they couldn't do that. So some Democrat in the past said, no, you can't do that. That's why prices are actually not coming down. So the solution for that would be to say, yes, allow real competition. I think that is one of their policies they have anyway. So what are you going to do when the polls have closed in November, and it's Kamala Harris, new president? You invest in healthcare, right? Because, the big bucks are going in this direction, without any doubt.
It's really interesting you say that, because, I started to look at some healthcare as a sector. And, maybe this is one for Murat, because at the moment, for me, it doesn't look so bad.
No, it did already do the catching up. The question is, did the market already show us the big predictions? What is going to happen? Obviously, yes, there are defensive sector. I know that as a fat-ass diabetic, right? I'm I will still buy my insulin. It doesn't matter whether there's a recession or not. So defensive sector, yes. But when I look at the healthcare sectors we've developed in the whole of Europe, right? And if you have a democratic or socialist leaning government, they don't want to have competition, because if you have a lot of players in these markets, you can't tell them which policy you want. So you want to have 3, 4 big guys, and you can say to them, listen, that's what we want. We believe we know better than the marketplace, and we have these aims. You do it for us. So they will channel all the possible funds into these big conglomerates. The old Warren Buffett trade, when you know there is a moat, and these guys will end up with all the cash being flushed. Yeah, that's what you're going to buy.
So, so is there really a difference between Harris and Trump?
Well, let's put it that way. Even Ronald
As an
Reagan,
international investor, if you think that there's going to be a weakening of the dollar, you're based in Germany, what's your thought process now? Because obviously Trump's trying to do great things for America. That's his label, MAGA. So he's trying to sort of, but of course in doing so, he's going to weaken the currency. I mean, that seems like the way he wants to go. And if he's going to do that, and as an international investor, just how much risk do you want to, is this something that's going to knock this American exceptionalism off its tracks? Because that's fundamentally the question. It might be theoretically a safe place to be because you've got a president who's looking after his economy and growing the business. But the business doesn't grow immediately. We know that, and so they're going to suffer from inflation. Bonds are going to get hit left and right. So then what happens, right? And if you're an international, are you going to be pulling money out, and where do you put money? This is really the question. And coming back to, we spoke about cycles and what does it look like? What does the outlook look like? And if this rally, we said, could last quite easily until 2025, but this sort of 2025-26 level kind of looks a bit iffy. And if that's the case, and it could well be that what's actually happening is that that money starts to come out from the US and into other markets or into other instruments. And what other instruments there are or what other markets there are is another question. But part of this big trade from 2009, where all the money went into America, and a little bits went into Europe and a little bits went into Asia. And certainly, very, very little went into emerging markets. Maybe that's all going to get reversed now in the process.
Well, they're still the cleanest shirt in the dirt hamper, right? And if the flows
not if they weaken their currency against the other.
But that's the point. If America is doing bad, the whole emerging markets will do bad as well. Yeah, maybe not at the beginning when the flow of funds change a little bit, but if America goes down, these countries don't have a chance in hell. Who is buying all their cheap products, right? Who is investing in countries which have sort of a legal system, but not American style? So I think that is the protection the United States have in there. And with we talked about inflation, that both their policies are inflationary, and it's one of my. I'm boring everybody to death with it because nobody seems to look at the other side of the equation anymore, which Trump actually did address in his first term, reducing bureaucracy in there. Yes, you can have growing money supply, but if you grow products this money can buy at the same time and make it easier, it's not really a problem. Yeah, you increase money supply, but you're not getting killed by inflation. What the socialist side wants to do is best price controls. And they want to spend all the money can possibly get, but the growth function is not there.
Look, I'm a big believer in smaller government, because this is what you're talking about is actually, we don't need to spend money because the money's already there. It's just we're being very wasteful with a big government, but like you, I'm old enough to remember Ronnie Reagan and
even he didn't cut the debt.
And his sort of famous line is, one of the most, dangerous things is when you get somebody saying, "Hello, I'm from the government. We're here to help you." And, he was trying to reduce government. Milton Friedman has been speaking about sort of the dangers of having excessive governments. Margaret Thatcher, tried to do her bit to reduce. And so they all tried in that time to reduce government. And what happened to the size of government thereafter? It went up. So however tough Trump is, that's one of the things where I would say this is not, whilst he might be able to solve, the war issue here and there, I think it's going to be a real tough thing for him to just walk into, I'm back home, the White House. Oh, let's go and reduce government today, and the size of government. He's tried and he's not managed it. And it seems that this beast called, the size of government is a pretty big thing. You just can't slay it.
If you would be really brutal, you would, what I said earlier, you would simply abolish the inland revenue, slap tariffs on everything that comes in. They are 70% consumer driven in their own country. There would be some distortions, but could you imagine how America would run on steroids if nobody has to pay taxes anymore? Suddenly they could produce everything they want in their own country. They have the energy, they have the food supplies, they have the brains with all the fantastic universities in there. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to happen. Yeah, we both know that. But when I look at that, yes, we're pretty much expecting that the policies will differ in shades because nobody's really addressing the big problems. Yeah? And at the end of the day, it doesn't make too much difference whether you have 2 or 3% more in your pocket or not when the inflation train is still running over there. So as an investor, yeah, we have the choice between, or we don't even have the choice. The Americans have the choice between Kamala Harris or whoever and Trump. So if I want to still invest, yeah, biotechnology looks, or the healthcare sector, let's put it that way, looks pretty good to me.
It's not bad, but as I say, right now, the questions that are going through my mind are, is this the time to underweight US? And obviously, things like the MSCI World as an index, it's been a stonking performance. And as I say, we're coming to a point where whether it's Harris or Trump, I'm not sure. So as a foreign investor,
we're both investors, right? What would you do with your money? Would you take it out of the US and put it into other civilized countries like Japan, both of us, yeah, as an economy, or would you really go emerging market route and say, yeah, I'm flipping the coin and believe that they can do something, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's about size and implicitly, right? If you look at what is the MSCI World Index and how is it broken down, 65% of that index is in the US.
Yeah.
And as a percentage, and that percentage, is just a percentage stays the same, but the cap, the market cap is just exploding in the US. I mean, it's really all the money it's managed to suck in all of the the money from everywhere. I mean, you had your discussion with Murat about the sort of the milkshake theory, yeah. And you're saying, well, is the milkshake theory, is the milkshake theory going to happen and all of this stuff? It's been happening,
yeah,
because the Americans have amazingly managed skillfully to attract the overseas money from overseas, from rich countries, from poor countries, from everywhere, so much so that there's not enough investment money to develop research in, as much as there is in America. Apple don't need your money, but let's just say you went and said, oh, I'm going to save for my pension, and you go and buy a fund. You're giving it to Apple. They don't need it. As you say, Tim Apple, as Trump calls him, has got his own boat and he doesn't need another boat. So what does Apple need your money for? But they're getting your money. And that's what goes on. So they say, well, we don't need it. I might as well give the board another 10 million each. And I mean, that's the reality. And for me, with this sort of Make America Great Again thing, it's not about Apple anymore. This is about the smaller companies. This is about middle America. This is about people, the Mittelstand of Germany. And that's what I guess he's trying to develop, because not everybody is going to, is interested in selling phones for a career.
Well, you just aimed at the tech sector, which is obviously very interesting. If we look at historical parallels, we had a huge tech rally up into the 2000s under Bill Clinton, and then W took over, and we had a horrific bear market. Yeah, nobody wanted to have that crap anymore. It was completely overvalued. A couple survived. Obviously, if you would have bought in 2002 Amazon, you would be ultimately rich. Yeah, but if you would have bought at the peak Cisco, you're still looking for the peak to have your money back. So could history repeat itself, that if a Trump wins, you have the scenario, okay, the conservatives, or the so-called conservatives, are now in, and the market is overvalued. Regulation will be taken down. Maybe these few tech conglomerates, which are very, well, left-leaning, yeah, in their corporate policies, might not get all the attention they crave anymore. And we see the opposite direction. If, however, Mrs. Harris gets the job, will they have the importance simply to communicate, let's express it that way, to communicate with the public and have more control over the public? So you still stay long in these things. They have the moat. They will go on ad infinity, especially if they can pass on the prices to the consumer, where the main consumer will be the United States, who's simply printing their money. And then we have a scenario why markets are rallying as they are. I'm going deep back into history. Yeah, in Venezuela, if you would have bought equities, you're fine, even with hyperinflation. If in good old Germany before the Second World War, yeah, where we had hyperinflation, and you would have invested your money into the equity market, you wouldn't have lost anything. Yeah? Equities outperformed, even when they had bread prices of $1 trillion, because equities went so much further. So if I have these two extreme scenarios, what's the sector I want to be in? Is it energy?
Well, I don't know. I honestly don't. I mean, I must say that is, a big question. I honestly don't know. And I don't think anyone truly knows, because this nuance and exactly what they want to do is absolutely unclear. But as you talked about large tech, and, does large tech continue? And, recently we just had a mini rotation into small caps, right? Go and look at how much money the small caps actually make. They don't make that much money. The companies in that sector, in the sort of small corporates, their earnings is sort of fairly flat. The earnings are growing in America, but they're growing in the large tech companies. They're not growing in small companies. Now, that may well change, with a kind of a Trump Vance ticket, as it were, and if what they want to try to do. So when you say what's the sector, I would say if there's anywhere where I think these guys will likely make most difference, is to support those Mittelstand in America and help drive their revenue and their P&L. So although we're seeing the rotation now into small caps, I think that's possibly driven more by short covering than it is from kind of the real, oh, I really like the small caps kind of trade, because, for what reason? The reason is, it's undervalued. Okay, it's undervalued, but it's like one of these value traps. If they're not making any money, you better get out in time, before everyone else does. So the sector, I think, that possibly does best in a Trump thing it may well be the small caps. Again, regulation light, supporting the industry, allowing these people to easy access to finance, government guarantees, you name it. But I think this is possibly where Vance, is more likely to exert his influence.
But aren't we talking more about a protective rotation than happening? Let me explain what goes through my twisted mind. you have now this conservative or Republican ticket over there, and they're reducing bureaucracy. The smaller companies aren't doing well. Somehow they managed to tame the inflation beast. First of all, is it again time for the stock picking portfolio manager to come back? And if it's time for the stock picker to come back, does that mean all the Delta One, the ETFs, the big ones, are simply being, well, sold into the market, and that drags it all down? What I'm saying is, yes, you might get the rotation. You might get the rotation into the smaller companies who then will do better. But after all, you'll end up with not really good performance because selling the large caps will drag the whole market down.
And I think that's exactly the point, is that the moment that people make a decision to unwind this exceptionalism trade from international, and this is really international money, it's come from Japan, it's come from, the money that leaks out of China, it's coming from Europe. There's no European company worth investing in. I'll go and invest it in America. I'll go and buy MSCI World, and 65% of my money goes into, these tech companies. And I think, that when that reverses, then of course that will make a big difference. Yeah, I mean, then seriously, the markets are likely to take a beating, because there's no way you can rotate out of an Apple or a Microsoft into small caps, because there's just not enough small caps. I mean, three companies, Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia, are worth pretty much the same as the Chinese stock market. And, you can't just sort of say, I'm just going to rotate out of Apple and stick my money in this. It's just, there is no market big enough. And that's why sort of instruments like, Bitcoin and gold are far too small for, absorbing or playing a role in finance, unless you add an extra zero or multiply them by 4 or something like this. They're far too small. And the small cap sector doesn't generate enough P&L for you to say, oh, I'm going to get out of big tech and get out into small caps. Good luck. What do you do with the 90% of your money that's left? When you say, I want to reallocate. So it's a really difficult question, I must say.
Well, that would be also the case, right? If we have this scenario, the small caps are doing better. The large caps are coming down in price. They can't use their shares as currency anymore to buy the smaller caps, at least not at the pace they've done it now, as Google did or Apple did, when they're all hoovering up
when they
the
could.
good ones. At the same time, if you have deregulation, you get more competition to the Nvidias of this world. Yeah? Smaller companies will have a chance actually to come up with competing products that will flock to a margin decrease in the big ones. So even if a conservative or a Republican policies would do the right things in terms of capitalism, they could end up with a bear market with the mother of all bear markets, because the flows will simply get out of the heavyweights in the market.
This is my fear.
No.
This is exactly, you've hit the nail on the head. So this is kind of the reverse milkshake thing now. You've had your milkshake, you've sucked in all the money, and then what do? What are you going to do with all this stuff? There's only so much that you can pull, because the rest of the global economy isn't sort of making enough money anymore to have surpluses enough to actually say, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and buy some more Apple stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just less and less of it.
I don't want to buy Apple stuff anymore anyway. Yeah? They've now
started
started introducing these goggles in Germany. Nobody actually wants them. I read that they've already stopped selling them in the US, or not developing any further into this. Reminds me of every 10 years. Have you noticed this cycle as well? They're trying to reintroduce 3D television. When you have a big hype, nobody wants them because it's getting too complicated, and then they disappear for 10 years. That started, I think, in the 80s. I remember that. Oh, Mom, can we get a 3D television?
I remember that.
No, too expensive. In the 90s, 2000, 2010, and well, so no, what I'm still trying to figure out, because our quantitative models are telling us, the longer dated models, that for the next 10 years, we cannot expect any excess returns in the US stock market. That's it. It's over. Yeah? We simply have to come back to a baseline because the market has run too far, too fast. Doesn't say that couldn't happen for the next 10 years, yeah? But then it needs a different motivator behind that. If that is hyperinflation, yeah, fine, you get it. But if markets stay like normal markets, then it's slim pickings anyway.
Yeah, and comes back to something that I said on one of the talks, maybe more than one of the talks over the last year that we've had, where I said, look, the net return over the next 10 years is going to be fairly small, probably, given where valuations are. However, you may well find that in the first 3 years, you've made, an absolute fortune, but the remaining 7 years, you're kind of left with next to nothing or small minus or whatever it is. And all we're doing right now is really front loading, this phase of, we're riding on the wave of this AI thing, chips and all of this stuff. And so we're going to, however long that lasts, that's sort of giving, we've got a good tailwind on that, and that's sort of driving returns. And that's a wonderful thing for stock investors. But, when this tailwind kind of dies down, we don't know quite when that's going to be, does that drive the next phase of growth? Or is it simply that, where valuations are, you suddenly realize, oh my God, and then the remaining period of your holding is generating very small returns. I mean, this is a real risk, but right now, people enjoying the momentum have been invested in stocks.
The longer our conversation lasts, and I hate to say that, the more I think I want a Harris policy in this, for the simple reasons they'll print money, they'll spend it hand over fist out there. The scenario we just described, that we would reintroduce competition now, the market could have a rotation, the smaller ones don't really do anything. So in a Harris-led government or a Democratic-dominated government, you could simply say, yeah, I go for the mega caps in the health sector or in residential housing because they will fill up the country with new immigrants that needs to be built somewhere. You have somebody who runs the purse strings, they print it, they don't care, they will take the interest rates down and lie to the public. No, there's no inflation to see here, go away. Even though when we all know, fine, it's getting more expensive. So if you have Trump and he would do what he says, that's not really inviting for the flow of funds in a marketplace, which is so overvalued. Am I making something, do I think?
The question is, you're going to have to take the pain at some stage.
Yep.
Do you take it now or do you take it later? And
later is always better, Nick.
Well, this is the reality, right? So where do you want to take that pain? And I mean, who knows? Maybe there is no pain, but my sense is the initial kind of shock of what's going on. I think there'll be, first thing is euphoric. Oh, yeah, Trump is great, and then I think kind of reality sets in, what that means with international flows, and then and then it's a big question mark. But at least perhaps he's fixing a system that clearly needs fixing.
Aren't they both run MMT? We had this conversation at another point, and I said, has anybody actually noticed? It doesn't matter whether you have Democrats or Republicans, or in the UK, Conservatives or Labour, or in Germany, it's CDU or an SPD. They all run this big experiment, eyes closed, and hoping that this time it's different. But they're all printing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are. And let's face it. When Nixon relinquished, basically said you can't convert your dollars to gold in 1971, whenever that was. And it was a large case of trust me, right? And actually, this system of trust me, in God we trust, right? In this system has lasted an incredible amount of time. And central bankers, they slag off Bitcoin, so it's not backed by anything. Well, your paper stuff isn't really backed by anything either. It's not backed by tax revenue because we know your tax revenue is below what you spend. So what's it really backed by? And it's backed by kind of the trust in the system and the confidence in the rule of law and all of this stuff and its kind of work. So you can get away with it until you do something really, really stupid. And I don't know what the really, really stupid is, because I thought we've reached the point of really, really stupid.
Yeah, it can always get
It
peakier.
can get stupider, if that is such a word.
Just wait the rest of the week, what news we'll get then. But it almost sounds boring. And then let me close that conversation, because the one investment that is so blindingly obvious and already had a fantastic performance for both scenarios, for our assumptions that they're not really going to change anything, that we are running MMT once on steroids and one full power, is gold, right? Nobody's liability. Everybody wants it. You need it. You need it in production. You can sit on it for 10 years. It will keep its value.
Gold and houses are sort of fairly well linked. So, I remember, I don't know if I showed it to you, the sort of analysis of house prices and gold over a long period of time. And that's actually, an interesting thing. I mean, you can live in a house, but you can't live in a gold, right? And you can rent a house, but you can't rent your gold. But when you want to sell your house, you've got this sort of whole process and paperwork and all of this stuff. And gold is going to the market and sell it. So it's a kind of a liquid thing, and therefore, we always see it as an important piece of somebody's, portfolio, and probably an increasing piece in someone's portfolio today than before. And we did a thing where I talked about sort of gold being that new risk-free asset, if you like, in the portfolio, that is no longer 60-40 anymore. It's sort of, sort of 50-30-20, if you like. And that's an important adjustment to how portfolios are structured. And then, of course, there's something called crypto assets and Bitcoin and all of this. And you say, well, surely I've got to have some of that as well. So you say, okay, well, let's stick 5% into that, and you take it off. And you've got a portfolio now with some assets that you probably wouldn't have considered before in a normal portfolio that are now kind of important to have in the portfolio. And I think, if people haven't sort of adjusted, I think that's something they need to think about seriously. And I mean, there is no kind of avoiding it, because you just can't trust anymore fully, the fact that, your paper is not just going to be paper.
Yeah, well, let me pick on that one point. You said you can't live in your gold, right? But you can hide your house. You can hide your gold. And, I'm reflecting again back thousands of years. In the UK, there seems to be a lot of gold in the ground. Yeah, people dig up old Roman ruins, and there are hundreds of coins, gold coins, somebody didn't find anymore after they hid them, right? But I'm always asking myself, there are only two reasons, actually, if you boil it down, when you hide it. Either a war is coming, you want to hide it, or a taxman is coming and you want to hide it. At least you can do that with gold. I'm now talking about if you are a country, right? You're a country, you have big gold reserves, the world is in a storm, everybody's printing money, you're set for the future, right? You say, fine, we have our gold reserves, we can survive another day. All the fiat looks money printers don't have that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And this is what is, has been the kind of the theme, is this whole central banks are now replenishing their gold reserves, not the Gordon Brown, I'll see a 400 bid, yours offered over and all of this stuff, and they haven't got any more. They are realizing that, an economy needs to have something in order, to say, actually, this paper is not going to sort of collapse and fall out of bed. I mean, actually, it'd be interesting to see what the Japanese think have in terms of gold. But it's really important when a currency is starting to fall to say, oh, by the way, don't worry, the worst comes to the worst, we'll make it convertible. And have we got enough of this stuff? And almost certainly not. And so central banks are even contemplating adjusting their gold reserves. So China's been doing it, and Russia has obviously been doing it, and Turkey's been doing it. And this has now been the kind of the trend. That's actually a big change in how things are run. It's not treasuries anymore. It's not these little bits of paper with, don't worry, you get your principal back in 10 years' time kind of stuff.
Oh, let me make an outrageous forecast, because the internet never forgets, but nobody will remember that. I predict that gold will be trading at $10,000 in 2040.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, that's 16 years. That's actually not too big of an annual return, but at least stick it in your portfolio. Don't stick it in with 1 or 2%. Put more of it in. That is the take I have from, well, all the statistics we have, that politicians always do the same. They have two choices. They can default or print money. What are they going to choose? They're going to print money, right?
Absolutely right. And that seems to be, coming back to the very first thing we're talking about. What's the difference between Harris and Trump? At the end of the day, they're going to deal with their politics and foreign policy and, domestic policy and all of this stuff. But the central bank have got to, and the Treasury have got to sort of deal with, borrowing and interest rates and balance sheet and so on and so forth, because neither of them have on the agenda to restrict their borrowing.
Well, let's finish on the one point. Whoever makes it, Mrs. Harris or Mr. Trump, I think the comedians will have a lot of fodder for the next 4 years anyway, because they're both hilarious in their own way, right?
Absolutely. It's not about the next 4 years. I mean, I think the next 5 months, there'll be an awful lot of memes flying around.
I think that's a serious forecast. President Biden will step down probably next weekend when the markets are closed. Writing is already on the card. Who are you really trying to sell? If you're a Democrat, that he's going to be the commander in chief for the next 6 months. It's not going to happen. They can give Kamala Harris a leg up, even if they're not too happy with her because of her current polling, but they can plug a hole here or there, I think, with a good choice of a vice president they have in there. And Trump's ratings haven't really gone up, only briefly.
Absolutely.
When this iconic picture came, but he was leading because people didn't like Biden looking so frail. That's solved now.
I think that in the end, in retrospect, it's quite a clever approach, because, Biden has recommended Harris, Obama has not. So the first thing they do is they actually wait to see how the markets react, how the polls react, and how the people who are sponsoring the Democrat, how they're reacting. And it seems, on the face of it, she's not sort of doing anything disastrous. She's managed to get the sponsors. The polls are very close to Trump. So then you say, oh, well, actually, she's a credible candidate. Now I can step back as president, but I couldn't step back if she wasn't credible. So there was like a probation period for your, and she has to survive that initial period.
So you would give her 4 weeks instead of my next weekend.
Well, I would say that the reason that he didn't step back on day one possibly was to say, look, let's see how it plays out with her. Because if she is not the winning candidate, we've got the joker in the pack, Mr. Obama, who can then put up another candidate. So he hasn't committed to her. So if she's credible, then he commits to her, then Biden steps back. And, then you've got problem solved, as it were. But if she blew it, well, then, as I say, Obama comes in with candidate number 2, Mrs. Obama or whoever it might well be. And then you try again with her, and in the meantime, they keep Biden looking fit and healthy.
Well, with Mrs. Harris, and then I'm really closing my philosophy about it. She has already, what people forget, reached rock bottom. All her policies, everything she did, went up in flames. It can't really get any worse, can it? There's only upside for her.
I don't think, I mean, coming back to this thing, I honestly don't think she has a policy that I can sort of really say, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Because that's really going to make a difference to, such a big country, such an important country of America. So I think in the end, she will get the support from the people who advised Biden, and she will inherit their policies.
Well, Breitbart once said, politics is downstream from culture. Yeah? If culture is shifting back to, you mentioned it right at the beginning, American exceptionalism, we don't have anything to worry about. If it doesn't, hello, Soviet Union.
On that happy note.
Yes, thank you very much for watching our political deliberations. As you've seen, you can have a nice political conversation without being nasty to one or the other candidate. It was really about, what do we see? What is the Trump trade? What is the Harris trade? What is 47 macro? What is 48 macro? To close on that line, I'm saying thank you very much, Nic, for your time. And I hope while you're watching this, probably a lot of stuff has already happened and we are completely...
Yeah, we missed it all.
Yeah, but therefore, we are not giving trade recommendation. It's for the entertainment value you're watching.
It's all entertainment.
Thank you very much. I say goodbye.
Goodbye.